Thank you, General McCarthy. Well, it's really it's an honor to be asked to be with you today, but to tell you the truth, since I spent 22 years as a Washington lawyer, then some time out at the CIA in the Clinton administration, I'm really honored to be invited into any polite company for any purpose at all. People sometimes ask me why I kept leaving a perfectly fine law practice to go in the government 5 times. And the answer, really, those of you who work for the government, you know why you do it. You work for the government, first of all, for the big bucks, and then for the public appreciation. I had a pretty good example of the public appreciation. I'd been out at the CIA 8 months. My wife and I were classmates at Stanford, decided we'd fly out to our class reunion, cash in the old frequent flyer miles, go first class, have a nice 3 days off for the first time taking any time off was in the job. And first thing that happened is my director of security at the CIA said, actually, Mr. Director, we want Mrs. Woolsey to go on a different plane because we don't want anyone named Woolsey on the plane. And I said, but my name's Woolsey. And they said, oh, no, sir, you need to fly an alias. And, of course, my first thought was, oh, there go the frequent flyer miles. So my 2 security guys and I go out to Dulles, and as we're heading toward the back of the plane, they drop by the cockpit, show the pilot, chief flight attendant that they're carrying weapons that they're authorized to by the federal government. We go back to those 3 seats right in front of the bulkhead where you can't even lean back. I'm wedged in the middle in between these 2 big guys and fly to California. So we're walking down the jetway. Flight attendant comes over and whispers something to one of them, and he just cracks up. And since he was a big sort of stolid guy, I was a little surprised. So I said, Murph, what's so funny? He said, you know what she just said? She said, you know, I've been on these flights for 20 years, and that's the politest and best behaved prisoner that we've ever had on one. And as I think back, it's really about the nicest thing anybody said about me in the 2 years I was CIA director. So it's the public appreciation. That's why you do it. Well, I want to share some thoughts with you this morning from about 35,000 feet on these issues that are fought out in terms of agriculture bills and energy bills and the like. Here just a few steps from us and in the editorial pages and the rest. And the first point I want to make is that most of us multitask pretty well when we're dealing with small and medium-sized issues, but we really would like for there to be only one big problem at a time, please. And for the 90s, we thought, a lot of us anyway, thought we had no big problems. The 90s were like the 1920s. Hey, we just won a world war. That one was cold. The one in the 20s we just won was a hot one. But nonetheless, we just won a war. The stock market was up. There weren't any big enemies on the horizon. Hey, beach time. And that's the way we behaved for most of the 90s. And around simultaneously, in 01 and shortly thereafter, 2 huge issues, 2 huge ways in which our way of life may be fundamentally disrupted, even destroyed, have loomed up on the horizon. One is Islamist terrorism, particularly given the religious fervor with which it has approached the real possibility of the use of chemical, bacteriological, or even nuclear weapons, or fundamental attacks on our infrastructure that are devastating. The second is climate change. And as I'll get to in a second, some people, probably most, who are worried about one of these issues are not especially worried about the other. Not always the case. Some are worried about both, some are worried about neither. But the 2 groups who are primarily worried about climate change and the other primarily worried about terrorism, I call the tree huggers and the hawks. And I'll get around to channeling a tree hugger and a hawk in a second and having a little bit of a discussion about energy. But first, a word about the world both groups have to consider and look at. The world we live in today has, the United States, and to some extent much of the rest of the world, has essentially 2 big energy systems. One is electricity generation, and in the U.S. that's a little over half coal, and then the rest nuclear and natural gas and hydro, a little bit of renewables. And the other is for transportation, and that is 97% petroleum products. Today they don't have a lot to do with one another. No, you cannot reduce our foreign oil dependence by building nuclear power plants. It affects 2% of our electricity. Oil does. So these are kind of separate worlds, and each has two types of problems. One of my colleagues at Booz Allen, Rachel Kleinfeld, used to say these could best be called malignant and malevolent problems. Malignant because either a human-made infrastructure or even the ecosphere, being a very complex system, is subject to what people in network theory and chaos theory call the butterfly effect. Butterfly flutters its wings on one side of the world. Complex system can fail in a cascading way, and if it's an ecosphere, say, create a tornado on the other side of the world. That seems kind of theoretical until you realize that 4 years ago, August, a tree branch fell in Ohio on some power lines in a storm and took out about 50 million electricity consumers of their electricity in about 9 seconds. That could be compared to metastasis, essentially, of the electricity grid. A metastasis, a malignancy vulnerability, that it was not as vulnerable to 10 or 15 years ago, say, before privatization. It probably would have created chaos in a tiny corner of Ohio. But we have layered on top of our balkanized electricity grid a huge national, even international market for buying and selling electricity, which it's not prepared to deal with, and it's not dealing with it very well. Makes it vulnerable because it's congested and tangled and a lot more complex than it would have been otherwise. You can have malignant failures, small, unplanned is the key thing, unplanned disasters occurring to the oil infrastructure too. Katrina missed the Colonial Pipeline from the Gulf very, very little bit. Still had to do some emergency repairs, but we weren't shut off from energy up here by Katrina, but could have been. And one type of malignant problem is that by putting a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we are at least creating a risk, and I think that's the best way to say it, of climatological change out decades from now that could be most unpleasant indeed. Is it for sure that by doubling the CO2 in the atmosphere from the beginning of the industrial age until a few years from now, that we are the sole cause of that? No, there has been climate change for a long time. There was climate change before there were human beings, much less before they were burning coal and oil. But are we making it more likely? The judgment of most expert climatologists is yes. Look, it is a form of malignancy as far as I'm concerned. If you smoke 6 packs a day, you may die of old age in your 90s and it may never affect you. Or if you don't smoke at all, you still may get lung cancer. People got lung cancer before there were cigarettes. But are you increasing the probability of getting lung cancer by smoking 6 packs a day? I think so. Most anybody with any kind of judgment who knows anything about lung cancer and cigarettes would say so. And we are, at least in my judgment, and more importantly, in the judgment of a lot of very distinguished climatologists, increasing the probability of things like ice sheet melting in Antarctica and Greenland, melting of the tundra, sea level rise within a century or two of several meters, which would make some huge changes in human life, almost all of them very, very negative. So that's one set of problems, malignant problems. And some of them affect the energy system and some of them affect the ecosphere, but they are both tied to the way we use energy.